You smell it before you see it. It is June 1462, and you are riding near the front of an 80,000-man Ottoman column moving through Wallachia, and the column is slowing for no reason you can identify yet, and then the wind shifts, and the smell arrives before the sight does, and it is a smell so thick and so fundamentally wrong that grown men who fought through the siege of Constantinople 9 years ago are pressing their sleeves against their faces and turning away. Ahead of you, in shimmering summer heat, a field opens up that does not end where fields are supposed to end. Stakes. Thousands of them, by the look of it, stretching to a horizon you cannot fully see through the heat shimmer and the smoke-thick air. Each one holds a body. Some still wear Ottoman uniforms. Some are stripped bare. Crows circle in numbers dense enough to darken patches of sky, and the sound they make, wings and shrieking, layered into something that fills the air like a second wind you did not ask for, is the first thing that tells you this is not a battlefield you were looking at. This is a message. And it was built specifically for the man riding near the center of your column, beneath the imperial standard. His name is Mehmed II. He conquered Constantinople when he was 21 years old, an achievement that had eluded every Muslim commander for 8 centuries before him. He is not a man who is easily shocked. He grew up in a court where succession was secured by fratricide, where infant rivals were strangled in their cribs before they could grow old enough to threaten anyone. He has seen what power demands, and he has personally demanded a great deal of it himself. And he is about to stop his army in front of a field built by a 31-year-old prince ruling a principality of perhaps 2 million people, and consider, for the first time in this campaign, turning around. Here is where this actually begins. Not on this road. Not in this field. It begins 20 years earlier, in 1442, in the Ottoman court at Edirne, where 2 boys are delivered as political hostages, collateral to guarantee their father's loyalty to an empire he does not trust and cannot defeat. Their father is Vlad II, voivode of Wallachia, a member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian chivalric order founded specifically to fight the Ottomans. His sons are now living inside the house of the enemy that order exists to destroy. The older boy is also named Vlad. He is 11 or 12 years old. Over the next 6 years in that court, he will learn to speak Turkish fluently. He will study Ottoman military formations, siege tactics, the precise mechanics of how an empire governs through spectacle and fear. Nobody intends to give this child the most dangerous education a future enemy of the Ottoman Empire could possibly receive. But that is exactly what happens. His younger brother Radu takes the opposite path. Radu converts, conforms, becomes a court favorite, handsome, charming, politically useful, the kind of compliant prince an empire keeps in reserve for exactly the moment it might need to replace someone less compliant. 2 brothers, raised in the same court, prepared for opposite sides of the same eventual war. Vlad seizes the Wallachian throne in 1456 with Hungarian backing. He is not a king. He is a warlord governing a principality that survives only by playing 2 empires against each other and hoping neither decides to simply absorb it. And from the very beginning, he rules through one consistent method. Boyars who oppose him are impaled. Merchants who cheat his tax collectors are impaled. Impalement is not an occasional punishment in Vlad's Wallachia. It is policy. It is the operating system of his entire government. By late 1461, Vlad makes the decision that will define his name for 6 centuries. He stops paying tribute to the Sultan. He begins raiding across the Danube, not small border skirmishes, but something engineered to send a message written in blood across the entire frontier. Here is the fact that should genuinely unsettle you. Vlad's most effective weapon during these raids is not his army. It is his voice. At garrison after garrison, his men approach in darkness and call out in flawless Turkish the exact phrases, the exact tone of authority, learned at the Ottoman court 2 decades earlier. Gates open. Soldiers step forward expecting to greet fellow officers. What greets them instead is steel. The empire that raised this man as a hostage taught him to sound exactly like one of their own, and now that education is killing them garrison by garrison along the Danube frontier. On February 11, 1462, Vlad writes a letter to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. It is not a plea for help, though help is exactly what he wants. It is a boast, and the number inside it is staggering: 23,844 Turks and Bulgarians killed, not counting those burned alive in their homes, not counting those whose heads were never recovered for the count. He had officials tally the dead the way a tax collector tallies revenue. He wrote the final number down and sent it to a king as proof of his own value as an ally. This is not the language of guilt. This is the language of a man who has discovered that horror functions as currency, and who is spending it deliberately to purchase an alliance. Mehmed assembles a punitive force of 60 to 90,000 men, Janissary infantry, Sapati cavalry, engineers, artillery, and tens of thousands of camp followers trailing behind like a moving city. Marching with this army is Radu, Vlad's own brother, brought along as a living contingency plan, the replacement voivode Mehmed intends to install the moment Vlad falls. As the Ottomans cross the Danube in late May, they enter a landscape that has been deliberately, systematically destroyed. Villages burned to their foundations. Wells poisoned with animal carcasses. Crops set alight in the fields. 4 miles in every direction, nothing. No food, no shelter, no water anyone trusts. Within days, dysentery spreads through the ranks. The summer heat presses down on men in heavy armor and padded coats. Wallachia is eating the Ottoman army alive before a single major battle is fought. On the night of June 17, 1462, with the Ottoman camp spread across a vast bivouac near Targoviste, Vlad executes the single most audacious gamble of his entire reign. He takes several thousand of his best troops and rides directly into the sleeping Ottoman camp in darkness, his soldiers carrying Ottoman-style banners, shouting commands in the same flawless Turkish that opened so many gates along the Danube. The objective is not a battle. The objective is to find Mehmed's tent and kill the Sultan before dawn, to cut the head off the empire in a single night. What follows is close-quarters pandemonium. Tents burn. Horses stampede through guy ropes and cook fires, sending sparks spiraling upward. Ottoman soldiers wake from sleep directly into firelight and screaming. For one night, the most powerful army in the known world cannot reliably tell friend from enemy, because the enemy learned to sound exactly like them. By dawn, Vlad has failed in the one objective that mattered. Mehmed survives, protected by his Janissary bodyguard. But the message has landed anyway. This is a man who cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bought, cannot be intimidated into compliance. He can only be destroyed. So the army marches on toward Targoviste. And that is how you arrive at the field. Here is what impalement actually was, stripped of every softened film depiction you have ever seen. A sharpened wooden stake, 3 to 4 meters tall, driven through the body from the lower torso upward, sometimes emerging through the shoulder or the throat. Victims were tied to the stake to prevent their own weight from ending their suffering too quickly, because the goal was never rapid death. The goal was prolonged, visible suffering, a message unmistakable from any distance. Medical analysis of comparable executions suggests a person impaled this way could remain alive for 12 to 24 hours. Some accounts claim 48. Some claim 72. The stake does not sever enough major vessels to kill quickly. It compresses organs, constricts breathing, and produces slow internal failure while the victim remains conscious for most of it, aware of the sun moving across the sky, the cold of night following the heat of day, the insects, the crows landing closer and closer as time passes. Vlad did not impale prisoners randomly where he caught them. He selected the ground specifically along the main approach road to his own capital, the exact road he knew Mehmed's army would have to use. Cutting, sharpening, and planting over 1,600 stakes required coordinated labor across weeks. This was not a massacre committed in a moment of rage. This was logistics. This was, in the most literal sense available, architecture. The Greek chronicler Chalkokondyles would later write that the field contained 20,000 impaled bodies, a number that has survived in popular memory for nearly 6 centuries. A 2023 Cambridge University study cross-referencing logistical constraints, source reliability, and execution timelines concluded that the real number was almost certainly between 1,600 and 1,700, roughly 1/12 of the legend. Let that sit for a moment. The horror was real. The field was real. But the number that built the legend was never a count. It was a story that grew in the retelling because the story was more useful to everyone involved than the truth. Even at 1,600 bodies, the scene that greeted Mehmed's vanguard was something most of these soldiers, veterans of the fall of Constantinople, had never encountered. The Ottoman chronicler Enveri, who was marching with the army and recorded what he personally witnessed rather than second-hand rumor, described simply a full field of impaled Turks. No metaphor. No literary flourish. A man who was there, writing exactly what he saw. Later accounts attribute to Mehmed a single line, delivered as he stood looking at what Vlad had built. What a brave man this Vlad is, to have done such deeds. We cannot rule this land with such a man in control. Whether he actually said those exact words is debated by historians. The quote survives in Greek literary prose rather than Ottoman court records, and may be embellishment. But what is not debated is what happened next. The conqueror of Constantinople, commanding the most powerful military machine on earth, began to reconsider how far this particular campaign was worth pushing. His army was already weakened by dysentery and hunger. Guerrilla raids continued every night, costing men for no territorial gain. And he had a tool sitting in his own column that might accomplish what 90,000 soldiers could not, Radu, offering himself to Wallachia's nobility as the version of this dynasty that would not impale them. The boyars did not hesitate long. They had spent years watching colleagues and rivals executed on stakes for offenses real and imagined. Radu's offer was simple and irresistible: stability, Ottoman protection, and the basic guarantee that they would not wake up on a pole. Mehmed withdrew his main force, leaving Radu and a smaller Ottoman-backed contingent to finish the work politically rather than militarily. This is the precise paradox sitting at the center of Vlad's entire war. The terror that broke an invading empire's will was the exact same terror that emptied his own kingdom of everyone he needed to keep it. Within weeks, the man who made the most feared army in the world hesitate had almost no one left standing beside him. Towns opened their gates to his brother. Soldiers deserted. Mercenaries vanished into Transylvania. His kingdom of stakes became, very quickly, a kingdom of one. He fled into Hungarian territory, where King Matthias Corvinus did not rescue him so much as arrest him, holding him for roughly a decade before eventually allowing him a strange, almost domesticated captivity, marriage to a relative of the king, children, a life that for 10 years resembled nothing like the man who built a forest of the dead. In 1476, Vlad briefly returned to the Wallachian throne. Within months, he was killed in battle near Bucharest under circumstances that remain genuinely unclear across contradictory sources. What happened to his body afterward is not in dispute. His head was severed, preserved in a jar of honey, and sent to Constantinople, to Mehmed II, the same man who had stood before that field 14 years earlier and considered, for one campaign, turning back. The Sultan who had looked at Vlad's forest of impaled prisoners now held Vlad's own preserved head in his hands. The Impaler had become, in the end, exactly what he had spent his life manufacturing for others. Within years, German pamphlets were circulating across Europe transforming Vlad from a brutal regional warlord into something closer to a supernatural monster, a cannibal, a sadist who washed his hands in the blood of the impaled. Partly Hungarian political propaganda justifying his imprisonment, partly something else entirely, the first mass media horror sensation in European history, printed booklets devoured by a literate public hungry for exactly this kind of dread. 400 years later, an Irish novelist named Bram Stoker would borrow Vlad's father's title, Drakul, meaning dragon, and graft it onto a vampire count who has almost nothing factually in common with the historical man. No contemporary evidence exists that Vlad drank blood, slept in a coffin, or feared sunlight. The myth did not describe the man. The myth simply swallowed him whole and wore his name afterward. The castle most tourists now visit as Dracula's castle has no documented connection to any of this. The real road, the real field outside Targoviste, the real Danube crossings where this entire story actually happened, these remain far less photographed, far less visited, and far closer to what actually occurred than anything a modern tourist board has built a gift shop around. Vlad Tepes was not a vampire. He was a 31-year-old prince with a small army, a gift for languages learned in the house of his enemies, and a complete, unsentimental understanding that fear is a weapon with no ammunition limit. He used it without mercy, against the empire that trained him to use it, and the empire, the one that had conquered Constantinople, the one that had not lost its nerve in 8 centuries of expansion, looked at what he built and, for the first time anyone could remember, hesitated. The number was never 20,000. It did not need to be.